First, thank you, Bob and Marianne. I am overwhelmed and humbled by your commitment to what's going on here. And you're a true asset to this community. And we're all fortunate to have this organization. I practice nuclear oncology at Nebraska Cancer Specialists. And a large part of my practice is neuroendocrine tumors. As a way of background, we were involved in the NETTER-1 trial, so we've been doing PRRT before it was approved. Scott is a nuclear medicine advanced associate, directs radiology and imaging for Nebraska Cancer Specialists, and runs the entire Itheranostics program. Scott also manages and develops all of the clinical trials that we have for PRRT, and Scott will talk about those as part of this presentation. Bob mentioned that we have clinical trials here for PRRT, but you don't have to be from Omaha to participate, and Scott will also address that issue. Okay, so Itheranostics. You all know what this is, PRRT, peptide receptor radionuclide therapy. We find a chemical that uniquely attaches to a cell surface on a tumor. To that chemical, we attach an imaging radiopharmaceutical. We do a PET scan. It shows us where that chemical localizes and how much of that chemical localizes. We then switch out the imaging radioactive material for a therapeutic radioactive material. And thus far, we've been looking at Lutathera, which is a beta particle treatment. So, alpha particles are huge. They're heavy, and they do a lot of damage when they come in contact with the nucleus of a cell. By comparison, a beta particle is very small and does damage, but less damage. In this case, we wanted to do a lot of damage. Alpha particles are stopped where they're localized, and beta particles move a bit. Now, the fact that this big heavy particle is stopped where it's localized means when it stops, it deposits all of its energy locally. If something moves through something, part of that energy is wasted in motion. So if you look at the size of the alpha particle and the amount of energy, it does more damage. Okay, so here's the major difference between beta particle PRRT and alpha particle PRRT. When a beta particle comes in contact with the nucleus of a cell, it breaks one of the two strands of DNA in that nucleus. That's called a sublethal hit, which means the beta particle damages the DNA but doesn't destroy it. When it's damaged, it can either go on to die or it can heal. On the other hand, an alpha particle breaks both strands of the DNA, and that's called a lethal hit. So when an alpha particle comes in contact with the DNA in the nucleus of a cell, it destroys it and it can't regenerate. PRRT now is universally moving away from beta particle therapy to alpha particle therapy because it's better. Scott will discuss the clinical trials that we have, and we are generally seeing what we expect. We are privileged to have representatives from RaiseBio, Eileen Sneeden, and who is senior scientist for RaiseBio, and will be able to answer questions. I'm not putting you on the spot, am I? No, okay, thank you. She's a great source of information. So, where is all this going? Well, we know that PRRT works. PRRT has been available for neuroendocrine tumors in the United States as standard of care therapy since 2018. It was available in Europe 20 years before then. So what took so long? Well, industry perceived that this tumor was so rare that it was probably not cost effective to bring it on in the United States. Until a very small study from one of the European universities, I think it may have been Erasmus, but I'm not certain, demonstrated that a huge number of patients carrying the diagnosis of atypical irritable bowel syndrome actually had neuroendocrine tumors. And the incidence of neuroendocrine tumors in Europe exploded. So this made this very uncommon tumor in the United States a somewhat more common tumor. And it's really difficult to diagnose this thing because the symptoms are so nonspecific. Some studies indicate that the time a patient reports a neuroendocrine tumor symptom to a doctor until the diagnosis is made is generally between 7 and 10 years. And we know that before that patient went to the doctor, they've been experiencing tumors. Because the symptoms are so nonspecific. I mean, who doesn't experience bloating? Who doesn't experience bowel symptoms from time to time? People experience flushing all the time. They're very nonspecific and non-directed symptoms. Fortunately, thanks to organizations like this, the medical community is becoming more sensitive to what's going on. The non-invasive diagnostic test that we had for this, it was called an Octria scan. Has anyone here had an Octria scan? Okay. Those scans missed 60% of the tumors. Okay. But then NetSpot came along and all of that changed. So patients would have these symptoms. They present to their physicians. They get the Octria scan. The Octria scan was negative, and they would completely forget about the fact that they were looking for neuroendocrine tumors. Well, because of the better non-invasive imaging technology, all of that has changed. So what we foresee is that PRRT will likely become first-line therapy for neuroendocrine tumors. In other words, once you're diagnosed, it will be the first drug that you get after cytoreduction surgery. And I'm personally a huge supporter of cytoreduction surgery prior to PRRT. Now, will PRRT cure neuroendocrine tumors? No. we can't give you enough radiation to get rid of all of the tumor cells without doing harm to the rest of your body. So the goal has become to convert a potentially life-threatening illness into a chronic condition, much like diabetes, coronary artery disease, rheumatoid arthritis, so that when the time comes, you will have lived a full and productive life, not significantly affected by your primary diagnosis. And when you pass, you'll pass with this, but not of this. So that's the goal. Now, there's a lot to be done. To achieve that goal, and knowing that we don't always kill all of the tumor cells, it will likely be that PRRT therapy will be administered chronically on a rational schedule for the life of the patient. It's not a one and done thing like we have right now. And in order to improve the efficacy of PRRT, there's a lot of research being done to look at combination therapy. There's already fairly strong evidence that giving somatostatin receptor analogs, such as sandostatin or lanreotide, improves the efficacy of PRRT. We've treated patients with the beta PRRT, a lot of patients, and we've seen good results. And we're encouraged by the results that we're seeing in our clinical trials, treating patients with the alpha analog. Scott, I'm going to ask you to talk about our clinical trials and how one may approach us about enrolling, even if they're not from Omaha.
Yeah. Thanks, Dr. Mehr. My name's Scott Degenhardt. I'm the Director of Itheranostics and Research at Nebraska Cancer Specialists. I've been with Nebraska Cancer for about 7 years, since 2015. Had been in nuclear medicine in the field my whole career for about 18 years. Fortunately, I've had the opportunity to work with Dr. Mehr for all of those years. As he mentioned, we were involved with the clinical trials and the early access program for Lutathera. It's amazing to see where that's come and how far along it has come. But yeah, even more exciting, now we have this next generation of PRRT, which is the alpha emitters, currently, as mentioned, in clinical trials. So I'm going to talk a little bit about clinical trials, the benefits of them, why they're so important, Then I'll talk a little bit about the clinical trials that we do have at Nebraska Cancer Specialists. So when we're talking about clinical trials in oncology, there's really two main goals, or two things we're trying to accomplish. The first being, we want to find better treatment options for our patients. That might mean we find a treatment that has a longer duration of response. It might mean we find a treatment that has a better response, or maybe a treatment that has less side effects than the currently approved ones, which would provide a better quality of life for our patients. The second goal, in addition to finding these better treatment options, is to find more treatment options. Cancer's smart, unfortunately, and after we treat with a certain medication or a certain drug for a while, there is the potential that cancer finds a way to no longer respond to that treatment and finds a way around it. So we want more options to be able to treat those cancer cells in a different way. So again, those are kind of the two goals: find better treatment options and find more treatment options. I feel like there's a common misconception with clinical trials that they're really only available after we've exhausted our standard of care options. So after all of the standard drugs are used, then we look at clinical trials. And my belief, and I believe I share this with Dr. Mehr as well, is that clinical trials should really be discussed and considered at diagnosis very early on. I'm going to talk about a clinical trial here in a little bit that is early on, and as Dr. Mehr mentioned, we are trying to move PRRT up in the lines of therapy. And if clinical trials aren't considered early on, it could potentially be a missed opportunity and really be a disservice to the patient. So,
Want the next one?
no, I think we're good there still. We'll go back one. So how else are clinical trials beneficial to patients? Well, they do provide access to the newest therapies. Currently the only PRRT therapy available right now in the standard of care setting is Lutathera. But with clinical trials, we can add several other options and provide those opportunities for the patients. And the last bullet point there is with clinical trials, we are the patients receive the same great care from their oncologists and the medical team, but there's also additional eyes on the patient in a very good way. The research team is there every step of the way with the patient. And in addition to the research team and the medical oncology team, the company or the sponsor that is conducting the clinical trial is also keeping an eye on the patient from afar. They don't know patient name, but they do keep a very close eye on the data, the lab results, the scans that come in, and all of those eyes on the patient is really a good thing. So a couple to kind of discuss a couple of the trials that we do have available at Nebraska Cancer Specialists, and I'll mention that this is not an all-inclusive list. There are many clinical trials out there for patients, and I would highly encourage everybody to go to the website clinicaltrials.gov. That's clinicaltrials, all one word, .gov. It's a free website. You don't have to sign up. It's just a website that, if you're not familiar with it, it has the information for every clinical trial out there, all thousands and thousands of clinical trials. You can search based on disease. You can search based on a number of different criteria to see what clinical trials could be available out there. There's an NCT number, the National Clinical Trial Number. It's kind of small on the slide there, but I've listed both of those for the two trials that I'm going to talk about here in just a second. That number is specific to the clinical trial. Every clinical trial has a unique NCT number. If you plug that in to the website, it's going to pull up that clinical trial and give some specific information about it. So again, kind of encourage everybody to look at that. So these trials here, the first one listed is we're partnering with our friends with Raise Bio. It's a PRRT therapy. It's an alpha emitter, and it's used after Lutathera. So if a patient has had exposure to Lutathera, and unfortunately, if the cancer does begin to come back or worsen, this is a potential option for the patients. The second trial there is a trial with Viewpoint. It's another fantastic company to work with out of Iowa. This trial is actually pre-Lutathera. So patients who have not had exposure to any PRRT therapies, this is a potential option. Again, another alpha emitter. And so you can see here, because of clinical trials, we now have potentially 3 options of PRRT for patients. We have a pre-Lutathera, Lutathera again as a standard of care option, and then one following Lutathera. And as Dr. Mehr mentioned, obviously these are available here in Omaha, but we do have mechanisms in place where we take care of patients really all over the country, can come here to Omaha and receive their care. Yeah, so I guess in conclusion here, we have good options for our neuroendocrine patients. You know, we have lanreotide, we have Lutathera. They're all good. They are really good, just not perfect. And hopefully through clinical trials, we can keep looking for these options to better treatments and have a positive impact on our patients.